So, first of all, I have to admit that this Parsha um, really hit me in a very personal way. Um, we also have Genesis, the story of Jacob's return after being with Laban. And then we also have Obadiah, who has some very tough things to say um, about Esau. And so I think this makes the figures that we're talking about in this in the readings are very close to our heart, both Jacob and Esau, as we will say. See, um, I think we can skip the housekeeping. So I think one of the key challenges that I've been having is trying to see things in perspective, not just to see what's happening in the world today in perspective, because I think all of us are really trying to understand what is going on. But perhaps starting, first of all, with seeing the story of the Parsha in perspective. So in order to do that, I prepared this table. We're not going to go through all the details. And everybody's has them in their slides, so you can always review them later if you'd like to. Basically, we have Jacob's age here on the one hand, on the left column. We have Isaac's age. And this is very significant because we know that when Jacob comes back to the land, he's going to have a certain period of time when he can still see his father Isaac. But one of the interesting questions that I asked during the Parsha was, what about his mother Rivka? Was she alive when he came back? After all, she was supposed to call him back when the time came, when it was safe to come back. So, and she never does. So we have here Jacob's age, Isaac's age. We also have Joseph, so that we can see the beginning of the story of Joseph, which is coming up next week, is already coming into being. Ruvain, as we see, Shimon and Levi are going to have a very big role. So it's interesting to see how old they are. So let's see. The red events here are all events that happened last week in last week's Parsha. The significant ones that I want to point out is that Jacob makes a vow. And we also know from Deuteronomy that we're not supposed to defer or delay fulfilling our vow. When we make a vow, we should do the vow as soon as we can. So it's interesting to see from this perspective all kinds of things that happened last week and happened this week. For example, last week we saw that after he finally had worked enough to for Leah and Rachel to become his wives, working for them 2 times 7 years, he tarried another 6 years. It was like Lavan propositioned Jacob, and he says, well, name your price, because he wanted him to stay, because he saw blessing in everything that Jacob did. So from a vow perspective, he's already delaying his return. On the other hand, one could say, well, Rivka never really called him back, as she had commanded him to wait until she does. So maybe it's not so bad, but we do see at a certain stage that Jacob senses 6 years later, and that's the 6 years that we see here, he suddenly senses anti-Semitism. He sees that they're not looking at him the way they did before. I don't know, for some of you, this might be very real, even with what's going on today. I think many Jews in the world today are suddenly seeing around them people who are looking at them differently than they did before. And the anti-Semitism that Jacob senses after he's very successful, he causes an angel to come to him and say, look, it's time to return home. And Jacob is so apprehensive about the way it would be taken by Laban and his family that he covertly returns with his family. He actually uh, he runs away with his family, and we know that Lavan pursues him, and he overcomes them. But Lavan is warned by Hashem not to do him any harm, and he makes a treaty with him. But notice how Jacob really only starts coming back, what some of us might call aliyah, when he finally comes back or returns to the land. Anti-Semitism plays a really big role. We're going to see that also later. So he gets to the land, and the first thing that happens in our parsha is that he ends up struggling with this man or angel, not clear. He finds himself limping. He fears Esav, sending his blessing to him, begs forgiveness from Esav, reconciles with him. And because he's limping, he seems to retreat, to recuperate at a place called Sukkot, which I think is very interesting. But this, of course, again, delays his return home. It's almost like he has some kind of an identity struggle. I think Israel today has a very serious identity struggle going on. So everything that we see here, as you can see, is very relevant to what is happening in Israel today. But he doesn't go straight to Beit El. He purchases a plot in Shechem. That doesn't end so well. Shechem is on the way to Beit El, so he hasn't passed down south enough to get to Beit El. He has not yet seen his father or mother. Dinah is raped. The entire city is deceived and obliterated by Shimon and Levi. Well, here again, we see all kinds of things that are that we can almost see them today. I must say that every year when I read this story, and Dina being my wife, we've always wondered about this story, has had difficulties with this response of Shimon and Levi, the way they responded, both the deception. We see deception seems to be playing a big role. There's deception and the way they essentially obliterated the entire city. Was this justice? Could this be justified by any means? I must admit that this year is the first year that I begin to think, well, maybe there are circumstances where there is no other way. But here again, he further tarries. He further tarries, and we see that every single delay that Jacob has with regards to fulfillment of his vow ends not well. It has very serious consequences. I think that we too are feeling very serious consequences here to Israel, to some tarrying that the Jewish people are suffering from, not yet doing what our identity requires that we do. We find ourselves sexually violated. We find ourselves dealing with mass murders both ways. It's really, really difficult. Furthermore, Rachel dies as she gives birth to Benjamin. There's a loss of a beloved wife. And finally, Hashem reminds him again, hey, you got this vow. And Jacob finally tells everybody to remove all of the idols within their midst. So look, we see here all kinds of things. We see sexual murder, idol worship. We're suffering from all of these things and the loss of the beloved wife. Finally, he goes to Beit El, but just before he goes to Beit El, her wet nurse Dvorah dies. There's no mention in the Torah anywhere when Rivka dies. But the Midrash actually tells us that Rivka dies, and because of that, her wet was Dvorah as well, before Jacob arrives. So it appears like when Jacob finally gets to fulfilling his vow and going to his parents' house, he missed it. He lost closure with his mother, Rivka. But he finally does fulfill the vow, despite all of these terrible things that happen, and despite the fact that he tarried again and again and again and didn't rush to do what he was supposed to be doing. The amazing thing perhaps afterwards is that after he does finally fulfill his vow and he builds an altar to the God of Israel at Beit El, wow, suddenly all the obstacles disappear. Suddenly Esau leaves Canaan to Seir Edom to make room for Jacob and Canaan. It's like as if the moment he fulfills his vow, everybody realizes that Israel belongs in the land of Israel and make way for them to be able to fulfill whatever role they have to fulfill. So I think you've already heard within this narrative how there are so many similarities between what we see here in the story and what we are experiencing in modern times with the Jewish people today. So we know that, as Jeremiah 16 says, that a time is coming when it shall no more be said, as God lives who brought the Israelites, but rather as God lives who brought the Israelites out of the northland and out of the lands to which they have banished, for I will bring them back to the land which I gave to their ancestors. Lo, I am sending for many fishermen, declares God, and they shall haul them out in large numbers. And after that I will send out for many hundreds. It's almost like they're different stages, and God forcing us to come finally to the land, just like we saw before. It's not easy. And it happens in stage at first in large numbers, and then there's hunting in smaller numbers. And it says in Jeremiah, out of every mountain and out of every hill and out of every cleft of the rocks, and I can somehow see the echo of this thing of the clefts and the rots in this hadith, which we hear today more and more by the Muslims, who are saying quite outright, Judgment Day will not come until the Muslims fight the Jews. The Jews will hide behind the stones and the trees, and the stones and the trees will say, "Oh, Muslim, oh, servant of Allah, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." So here we see in our prophets this notion of God gathering like a fisherman or like a hunter, gathering all of us to return to the land. And we see here the opposite kind of approach that says we have to get rid of all the Jews, that they should not be in this land. And we're experiencing the result of this today. Now, to gain perspective, I think very often when we look at the situation here in Israel, we see this Goliath called Israel with its army fighting Hamas and Hezbollah, which appear to be very, very small and inferior armies. It's almost like we are the Goliath, they are David, and we see throughout the world so many people who really see them as the underdogs and feel therefore that we should be the ones to give in and to essentially resolve the situation by making constant concessions to the underdogs, to the Davids. But this isn't true. We have to really see what's going on in our region. And we can see here from this map how basically we are really the Davids. We are the David, and the Goliaths are all of these nations, most of them hostile, as we can see from the color coding, some beginning to normalize relationships, but we're not there yet. Some having indirect or covert ties, which is also things into being. The peace treaties are still without any relationships. We don't have relationships with Egypt and Jordan. There are even within Egypt and Jordan voices to join our enemies. And basically, all of them who believe in what that hadith that we just said before are fully committed to a holy war to wipe tiny Israel off the map. We see how tiny we are, followed by all infidels in the Western world. So everyone on this call should be concerned. And we can see the craziness that's going on in the world. So we see so much hatred. And if you think the numbers are in our favor, they're far from being in our favor. We just take a look at these numbers, and we, of course, won't review them now. We can look at the economic clout of some of these nations. Turkey right now is completely committed to this jihad, and we can see what they're doing. So we're dealing with a very, very large number of powerful countries who are all committed to this craziness of making sure that Jacob doesn't come home. That Jacob, in fact, whoever is here should be wiped off the map. So I think one of the first lessons that we can see here is that if we thought that Israel could at least serve as a safe haven for Jews, that isn't really what Israel is destined to have. It isn't a safe haven for Jews. And maybe even Jacob, he doesn't return in the beginning because Rivka says, I'll let you know when it becomes safe. But that never really happens. So we can't wait until it becomes a safe haven for Jews, because that's probably not why we're supposed to be here. Not only that, but we see that even with friendly allies, and here I'm referring to the US and to the UK, the Gen Z, that is the younger generation, the ones that were born from 2000 and up, we see that the younger generation, which is only growing in terms of their power within the UK and within the US, they side with Hamas. And their support for Israel wanes with every passing week. These are just some numbers from Facebook of posts. 39 times more posts that are free Palestine than those that stand with Israel. 39 times more. On Instagram, 26 times more. We can see here, this is kind of, in terms of dates, we can see how it's waning. If 41% in the US, all ages, were pro-Israel on October 16th, a week or 10 days after October 7th, on November 15th, it's 32. It's going down, and this is growing up. So when you see these trends, we know that the days ahead are going to be very, very difficult. But the diaspora is not going to be a safe haven for Jews because of what we've just described. So why make Aliyah when safety in Israel can be even more daunting than safety in the diaspora? Is Jacob's struggle when he returns to the land similar to the struggle facing Jews in Israel and in the diaspora today? Will the outcome be the same? So thank goodness we've got Hanukkah. Hanukkah starts this week on Thursday. And Hanukkah reminds us that it isn't about numbers or power, that would be perhaps technology. When in Zechariah, in chapter 4, when he is shown this lampstand, all of gold, with the lamps are 7 in number. Of course, here we have 8 because this is what we do on Hanukkah. But the lamps above it have 7 pipes and 2 olive trees, one on the right and one on its left. And when Zechariah is asked, well, what do these mean? He says, I don't know. But he is then told, not by numbers nor by power, but by my spirit, said God of hosts. I think this is a very, very powerful reminder that the challenges that Jacob faces when he comes back and the challenges that we face today have everything to do with the spirit. We will not be able to deal with the numbers that we've seen before and the trends that we've seen before if we don't recognize that it's the spirit, God's spirit, the God of hosts spirit, that must ultimately dominate. And then we have the Haftorah, the flip side of this. Because in the Haftorah, Obadiah chapter 1, he speaks very, very harshly about the descendants of Esau. This is what we read in the Haftarah. Your arrogant heart has seduced you. I will make wise vanish from Edom. And I must admit that sometimes when I look at the West and Edom and the descendants of Esau are identified as the West, sometimes I really look around and I say, my goodness, how incomprehensibly stupid it is to see what's going on in the Western world. There's no wisdom, there's no understanding. Don't they see what they're doing? But it's also, the anger of Obadiah is also for the outrage to your brother Jacob. It's how you treat your brother Jacob. Even use the word Hamas here. Hamas achicha Yaakov. You should be ashamed. I find it amazing. You see videos of what's going on in the world, and you see that the pro-Hamas people are saying, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you. But Obadiah is saying the opposite. Shame on you. How could you be treating your brother Jacob this way? How could you gaze with glee on your brother that day, on his day of calamity, which certainly could describe October 7th? But it promises that the outcome will be that the house of Jacob shall be fire and the house of Joseph flame. I find it interesting that there's house of Jacob and also house of Joseph. So who is this house of Joseph? And it shall burn it and devour it, and no survival shall be left of the house of Esau, for God has spoken. So what does this mean? Does this mean that the entire West will be wiped out? And we are promised that Jacob will possess the Ephraimite country of Samaria. Yes, we see even today this is something that we have not yet achieved, and apparently we must. And Benjamin, along with the Gilad. And what belongs to the Phoenicians as far as Sarfat, by the way, that's also southern Lebanon. And the towns of the Negev. We can see the challenges that we have down in the Negev. For liberators, and I wonder who these liberators are, shall march up on Mount Zion to wreak judgment on Mount Esav, and dominion shall be God's. But we know that Esav descendants have a better alternative. Like I said, we can see so many in the West responding just the way Obadiah seems to be describing why there is so much anger towards the West. But not everybody in the West is responding that way. Certainly those on this call are not responding that way. And it's very interesting to see that in the Torah, when it talks about these two nations who are in your womb, this description given to Rivka, it says it's written not as goyim, it's written as geim. And the Talmud actually says that there will be proud brothers together. Both Esav and Jacob will be together, and they will be proud nations, as it was with Rebbe and Antoninus. And maybe this is currently a minority amongst the descendants of Esav, but perhaps this is what must ultimately triumph. And there's also another place in the Talmud where it talks about these two as being, that must be equivalent, they must be together. So with this, I'd like to show you a video that, do you see this? So I kind of would like to summarize this very long introduction, forgive me, um, with these two final slides. The first one, as we can see in the Parsha, and we're not going to go again through what we've already gone through, we can see here that the Parsha really deals with so many challenges of reconciliation, reconciling the past, Jacob, what he did, the deception, how does he fix that? Reconciling our identity, is Jacob to be in Israel or is he to stay at Jacob? Reconciling local cultural differences that we saw when it came to Shechem, reconciling internal, differences. Internally, we're already seeing the issues with Ruvain and the challenges within with the two matriarchs and their children being at odds. And it concludes with reconciling the future, because we know that Esav is going to have kings and is going to become, as we see today, the amazing Western world that we're familiar with. And this reconciliation has to happen for God's plan to be fulfilled. So I'm going to end, before we go into the questions, with another cool video that Dean created from a meeting that we had together in Kansas City. וירוץ עשיו לקראתו, ויחבקהו, ויפול על צוואריו, וישקהו, ויבכו.
I don't know what you said. Okay, it sounded beautiful. The melody was wonderful. But what does it mean?
All right,
can you give me a translation from Hebrew to
I'll
English?
give you a translation.
That's why we need you. Enlighten me.
It says that Esav runs towards him and he hugs him.
This is a reconciling moment.
Yes, but Jacob wasn't anticipating that it would be a reconciling moment.
Mm-hmm.
He's very anxious. He's concerned that Esav might actually kill him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And instead of being killed, he suddenly gets hugged. And it says he falls on his neck and he kisses him.
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment of reconciliation, they both cry, which I think indicates that this is not just a moment of reconciliation, but it was a moment that was not anticipated.
Mm-hmm. He was trying to appease him. There's a lot of trouble going to appease his brother, fearful for his own life, his family's life. And all of a sudden, Esav is in a reconciling, wow.
And I think it has everything to do with Jacob knowing now that he has to take on a new identity called Israel.
Oh, wow, that's really precious.
And that when Esav sees him, he doesn't see the brother that he knew when he was young, who's, got him to give up his birthright and stole his blessing. He sees somebody who has taken on purpose and ministry. Mm-hmm. And that's something that Esav can respect.
And it's been given a new name.
And he's being given a new name.
Wow. And in many ways, as Christians, Esav, and Jews, Jacob, we're in this same transition of life, moving towards seeing the fullness of what God's redemptive plans are, not just for the Jewish people, not just for Gentiles, for those in the nations, but for us together as one in Him.
And these dots that you see atop the word Vayishikehu,
and
these dots are always something mystical, something indicating something either in the present or in the future, which is subtle, not obvious from the story. And to me, I think it's reflective of something very deep that's happening already then and is happening again today.
In light of what you've just shared me, you know what I see?
What do you think?
I see the teardrops father's teardrops.
That's so beautiful.
Falling on this Torah scroll when the family is coming together and hugging and kissing their one. I feel like I need a hug and tissue
I need a hug too.
Please accept my virtual hug.
Thank you.
To all of you.
Mhm.
We can end with this slide with the final questions. What keys to reconciliation do these readings offer when it comes to reconciling the past, our identity, who are we, local cultural differences and internal tribal differences with an eye towards the future? Definitely things that we can talk about in the breakout room, or if we decide to do so, we can do it all together. What are the implications to Christian descendants, to the Western world of today, as Israel struggles with the Islamic descendants of Ishmael today? Who is the house of Joseph? Who are the liberators that will go up? Maybe these liberators actually include people from the West, who have to save the West from those who have chosen hatred instead of love. And finally, why didn't Esau and Jacob join forces in the Parsha? It's very interesting. On one hand, we see that Esau does reconcile, but they don't join forces. Esau invites Jacob to come to Edom. How must our response today differ? Who holds the keys to reconciliation between Israel and the nations today? All right, that was long. My apologies, but I felt that it was somehow needed to gain perspective, both with regards to the story then and perhaps more important, with the story that we're in today. We are rewriting the story of biblical times today. And it's today that everyone has a really important role. We all hold the keys of reconciliation, and we can only do it together.
So Moshe, can you share why you hopped on? Because of the questions, please. That was excellent.
I hopped on because I got home 5 minutes ago. Other Sundays I wasn't available at all. So I just came in now for my shift, and I said, let's see what they're doing. And I told my room, in which I was for 3 minutes, that when I saw the question and the word reconciliation, it jumped up to me that you cannot begin any act of reconciliation before the abolishment of the evil, of the bad, of the darkness. It doesn't come to thought at all of doing any reconciliation for the extreme evilness that we saw 2 months ago. So we have to finish that job. And whoever is not part of that and declares that he is not part of that, and that is not his way, and that he believes in a different God and in a different way, with him, you can do reconciliation, but no other way. That was my remark.
Thanks
And then
so much.
Yoav said that holds true, because if you go back to World War II, we had to destroy both Japan and Germany, where we had to destroy parts before we could ever begin to make a reconciliation. So that was the end of our room. That's where we were at the end of our room. So,
And how
okay,
about
room.
the beginning of your room? What other things came up in your discussion?
Oh, that Dean. Where
I
is
want to.
Dean?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Dean, I want to bring up what you brought up, and Lisa also, and a little bit of our discussion about that. So Dean brought up a very profound question. It's like, how do other Christians feel about this this discussion among the Jewish sages that Christianity is like the not necessarily the physical, but the ideological descendant of Esau, because of, they say Rome is the descendant, and then of course Rome became the Christian empire, and that's a really big thing to take in. And Lisa definitely said that the first time she heard that, it was she was very taken aback. And it's like, I don't want to have anything that want to be associated with that sort of negativity at all. And so then we brought up that it's not like we don't have to be stuck in the ideological heritage that maybe we might have. And I brought up the Green Prince, the son of one of the Hamas leaders, who saw the brutality and the evil of Hamas, and he was like, I need to get out of this. And at the risk of his life, to this day, he's still speaking out for the sake of Israel, especially now during this war. He's speaking out very intensely, like very consistently at the UN, at like everywhere he can. And may Hashem bless him with like long life and with a special place in the Olam Haba, in the age to come. Because I mean, it's like he's such a warrior for the people of Israel, standing up for Israel. And that is the amazing lesson of the Torah, that no matter what background we're from, we can take in the lessons of the Torah, and we make, each and every one of us, we make our own destiny. We can choose. Just like the idea of reconciliation we brought up was Ruth, that like the nation of Moab, God was so disgusted with the evil that they had done. He said, no males from Moab could ever enter in with the people of Israel. And Ruth, she left her people, her life, everything in Moab, to go home with Naomi. And she said, your people will be my people and your God will be my God. And so that is, that's the positive part of what we discussed in our group, is that we all have that amazing ability to read the Torah, to connect with like people who are, we're able to connect people from Israel and people from all around the world. And that's what I love every time we say Hallel during Rosh Chodesh, a new month, or the Hagim and everything, because there are so many Psalms we say there where it's like, where it says people of, where God's kind of breaking down these different groups of people. And it's like, Kohanim, bless Hashem. People of Israel, bless Hashem. And it's like, all those who fear Hashem, bless him. And it's all together. They're not like off in their own little group. All those people from the nations who also fear Hashem, they're there grouped with the people of Israel, united with the people of Israel. In fact, that's just a beautiful message of the Torah. And that's a uplifting thing that I think we can all take away from this, our discussion from our group.
Beautiful. Dean, anybody else want to add to from the first room?
Well, it's already almost 9:30. Would you like
Yes,
to do?
indeed. Dina, do you think you could summarize our room quickly?
It was tough. That's tough. That's tough. Yeah, you could do it.
Well, I just like to perhaps end with one thought, because we've already said so much. There are only two faiths that I know in the world that truly came from one womb, and that is Judaism and Christianity. And so what perhaps that is why we do look at Christianity as the continuation of Esav, because Esav, as we saw in the story, he reconciles with Jacob. And as we see from the Talmud, the story of Antoninus and Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, that there was this Roman emperor and this head of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Sanhedrin. They were like brothers, and they learned from the way it was written in the Torah that ultimately Esav and Jacob will not just be twins in birth, but they will also be twins in togetherness and in bringing light into the world. And it will not be two nations, but rather they will be two proud siblings, brothers. They will be true brothers. And throughout the Torah, they refer also to Esav as brothers. So I have to thank Dean for having introduced me into this journey of learning how beautiful a relationship we can have between these two twins, Israel and the Christians, and how we can together work in fulfilling God's destiny in this world and truly love each other, like you saw in that video. It's I'm sure, like Dean says in the end, God is, when he sees us coming together as we do every week, and not just in these sessions, but when we love each other in so many different ways, we help each other. The Christian, so many in the Christian world are standing by us, even in these very difficult times. I'm sure that these are indeed the tears of God that we see in that verse, in those dots that are on top of Ishakeu. And may we continue to learn how to please God so that we can all become one with him and each other in joy.
And thank you to you. You've walked this path through some awkward corridors. And I think there'll be blessing for the both those brothers coming together. We there's a lot of work yet to be done, but to God be the glory. Phoebe, you've got your hand up. You've got the last word.
Yes. Yes. In the video, when I saw Jacob limping, and yet he became Israel, what came to my mind is that Israel still today carries the burden of the world. You know, you could see heaviness on his face, the limping, the stick. And for me, it was the burden, that the worldwide burden Israel still carries for the nations, bringing them back to that place of reconciliation. That picture was speaking loads of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
May we have only
Yeah,
good
stay
fighting.
safe.
And
Yes,
looking
and
forward
Chag
to
Sameach.
Moshe,
Chag Sameach, Hanukkah
Chag
Sameach.
Moshe,
Sameach, Hanukkah, Ken.
wisdom to
Many
Moshe and other
donuts.
leaders to rout out evil. Thank you.
And Moshe,
Thank you
as
for
soon
all
as
your
you
service.
can
God
join
bless
us
you all.
and lead us, we will look forward to it.
yeah.
Hanukkah
Moshe.
Sameach.